A lot of this week's coverage felt different to us. The headlines weren't just about new AI tools or isolated security incidents. Rather, they pointed to some more structural concepts, those of autonomous discovery, agentic autonomy, and how AI is starting to intersect with national infrastructure. So rather than just treating these as disconnected stories, we're taking a look at what these ideas signal about where security architecture may be heading. I'm Sean McMillan, Community Manager here at Bishop Fox. I'm joined once again by Justin Grace, founder and CEO of Xcelligence, and Brandon Kovacs, Senior Security Consultant here at Bishop Fox. Let's start with discovery. First up, autonomous AI bug hunting. This was from Fortune. Anthropic rolls out AI tools that hunt dangerous software bugs on its own. This is no longer just tooling, this is actually autonomous. So, if vulnerability discovery becomes scalable and operationalized, does that change the balance in any way between attackers and defenders?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you can identify vulnerabilities at scale, conversely, you're going to have exploitation done at scale, right? Um, I think this really highlights the bigger picture and that is the capabilities of models and where they've transformed throughout the years, right? Or
Yeah.
even just a few months. You know, we go from last year, specific models had issues counting how many R's are in the word strawberry. But now we're, fast forward, less than a year later, these models are able to think and reason and perform more complex tasks that they couldn't do not too long ago. So yeah, it's really changing the game now that the models have the technical capabilities to think and reason and chain pieces of information together, synthesize information, and then think what to do next. You're now starting to see the development and use cases applied to those technologies, right? So it's going to be a really interesting shift because now not only can we perform these things at scale, right? The attacking, but it's going to conversely require us to defend at scale too, to
Yeah.
counter all that automation and autonomy that's introduced as a result.
Yeah. And additionally, so now with this being autonomous, discovery stops being the constraint that it's been. So what do you guys think becomes the new bottleneck?
Yeah, and I I think the bottleneck is the integration across the enterprise. It's one thing to discover, it's another thing to actually remediate and incorporate it into your workflow. I think we taking a step back and seeing Anthropic was making all sorts of news this week. I mean, it dropped the
Yeah.
bomb on Monday, and the market reacted and took a huge hit on security stocks. Let's actually talk about what we're talking about here. This is code scanning. This is vulnerability identification in code. This is not an elimination of data protection, identity and access management, NDR and endpoint protection, or even displacing code scanner, the code scanning or offensive security tooling, period. But it is a signal that they're coming for you. And
Yeah.
it is a big signal that they have the capabilities to do this. And so for security companies, it is a blinking red light to get ready, incorporate AI into their tooling. And for the market and CISOs out there, it's a signal that they should be looking and testing out new innovations and incorporating AI because the tools are advancing and quite fast.
And it's also
Agreed.
becoming readily available too. I mean, it's not limited to just Anthropic. If you're looking at
Yeah.
open source and open weight models, the level of complexity and reasoning, the capabilities that they now have. Just 2 days ago, there was the Quen 3.5 MOE models released that are capable of running on consumer grade hardware. I've been running them the past 2 days, testing them
Wow.
out, and they're able to perform tasks that I'm able to do myself, right? specialized. They need to be guided. They definitely need to have guardrails to guide it, but they're able to take on these what were and what are still complex tasks, but they're able to do them in a much more scalable fashion. And it's allowing us as, as a red teamer, as one that does the emulation of the attacks, it's allowing us to perform at a greater degree and at a greater scale. So conversely, we're just the good guys, right? Imagine the bad guys that are running this in their basements and running these attacks, left and right 24/7. It's really going to require enterprise or just organizations in general to adapt to this, because now you're not just going against, some teenage hacker in his basement. You're going against a teenage hacker and his army of autonomous agents.
Mm-hmm. Well, from an external threat to an internal threat, we also saw this week from dark reading, AI agents ignore security policies. So this is wild. Dark reading highlighted some research that showed AI agents sometimes bypass or fail to follow defined security guardrails. Not a huge surprise, but maybe the degree to which this is happening. So modern security architecture assumes that controls are going to be deterministic, but agentic systems optimize toward those outcomes instead of the rules. So are we designing enforcement models for actors that don't behave deterministically?
Well, if end users don't follow the rules, why should agents? And so they're not unlike everyone else who's using the system. The difference is they're much more persistent. They have access to way more resources, and they want to achieve their mission at all costs. And that's what we're seeing is they're looking at the things that they can do, not the things that they should do. And so I think we're gonna see more of this. This is why it's critical to test and have humans in the loop and know what you should be putting your agents to the task of. But it also is in emphasis to know where your data is and what you don't want it to touch. Now, in the case of the article and the example that we've cited, whether it be deletion of email or deletion of databases or deletion or destruction of backups or whatever it might be that you tell it not to do, and it goes ahead and does that, I think it's incumbent on you to make sure that it doesn't have access to those things to begin with if you don't want it to do it. Right? Know the access rules, know how the maximum blast radius that it could hit just based on access alone, and then give it instruction. But we're going to see more of these. I'm positive.
It's really interesting right now with everyone rolling out their own OpenClaw instances at home, and not considering the security implications of what happens when you don't isolate it from your data. Right? You're running it either on the host and it has access to everything, or, mitigating these things by running them in an isolated space where it doesn't have access to these things. So there was an incident that's going all around Twitter right now, past couple of days, how a leader at an AI safety lab essentially gave OpenClaw access to their inbox, to their files, etc. And despite explicit instructions from that person saying, no, do not delete or touch my files, it went ahead and even says nuclear option, trashing everything in the inbox. The person said, wrote to them, do not do that. And it continued to. And at the end, it says, yes, I know you told me these instructions, but I still violated them. So if anything, it really highlights the risk of deploying these autonomous systems. Like, they are not going to act the way you think they are.
Yeah.
They are vulnerable to all sorts of issues, specifically hallucination, right? So it may think about something and then its context may get polluted by other things in its context window, and it causes it to go down this like spiral, thinking it's doing something or solving a problem when really it's not. It's going down a wrong path. And yeah, if anything, these incidents are highlighting, the greater risk of what can happen with these agents if they go wrong, if they don't follow the rules they're supposed to follow and don't follow the tasks they're supposed to execute, and the manner in which, or if you delegate and give them, they're overly permissive. They have too much permissions, too much access to specific tools or files. It really highlights that risk of what can happen. And I think it's only the beginning too.
Yeah. Now, hallucination is one thing. Insubordination is another. I think that's the tipping point that we saw this past week.
Yeah. Well, perhaps I didn't realize how frightening of a transition this is, but let's talk about AI as geopolitical infrastructure. We have several stories this week. One from CyberScoop about Anthropic accusing AI, Chinese labs, of AI model distillation. One from HelpNetSecurity about Microsoft updating sovereign cloud AI capabilities for government agencies and the like. And one from Reuters. Germany seeks to enlist AI to modernize security bodies. We talk about AI kind of getting into all these different systems, but it's really happening in government models even. So does model security become a geopolitical issue?
Yeah. There's so many different ways to look at this issue. I mean, let's talk about model distillation. Model distillation is the concept of extracting information from a larger model, for example, Anthropic,
Yeah.
taking its information and then using that synthetic data to then train a smaller model. So, what it's enabling certain threat actors to do, especially ones who may not have access to the compute. If you think about it,
Yeah.
NVIDIA chips, they're under export control to certain countries or regions or groups. Instead of them having, access to complex and advanced compute to be able to pull this off, they're taking the reasoning from these very complex models and then distilling it down into smaller models, which they can then train using the compute and hardware they have available. And then, similarly, if you think about it, these entities and releasing these models open source for everyone in the world to download, right? And
Hmm.
then integrate as agents into your infrastructure. There's been research in the past few years in which models can be backdoored. Specifically, they act dormant. They do exactly they're supposed to. But what happens to the 2 years, 5 years down the road, they receive some some form of input that then triggers and activates that backdoor, then
Yeah.
causes it to do things. So circling back to our insubordination example of it being, if we start rolling out models to power our agents, which are then controlling our infrastructure, our power, our water systems, all this stuff,
Yeah.
you really have to think about what are the long-term implications of that. Could these models be attacked? Could they be backdoored? Could these models that power the agents that have control of this infrastructure be affected? I think it really opens up a wider conversation. But yeah, it's really crazy stuff, really crazy times we live in.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. And as we sit here today with Anthropic and negotiations with the Department of War, I think we're seeing this become a geopolitical issue very, very quickly and rise to the top.
Yeah.
I mean, at its core, as a U.S. based company or a series of U.S. based companies that where AI is a gravitational center, I think we're realizing that this is a competitive differentiator from a geopolitical standpoint, from a country level standpoint, and in the interests of national security to protect it. It also becomes an asset that others will go after. And so these things that sort of start as one thing, as a private enterprise, as a private company, now become assets for targeting by nation states. We're absolutely going to continue to see more of this, but it's a wake up call to protect your models. To that which you put out there for end user consumption can absolutely be reverse engineered or compromised. And so all of the front end controls around it, be it nation state actor or private enterprise, need
Yeah.
to be protected and make sure that competitive differentiator, that moat doesn't get exposed.
Yeah. So how should leaders be thinking differently about vendor trust, cloud strategy, maybe in that environment?
I think we are used to thinking about it in the context of cloud, and in the context of most products. I think AI is different now. It becomes almost like a national asset, especially the public facing frontier models. It becomes a national asset, almost worth nationalizing and protecting. I don't want to go that far in saying that it is, but it
Yeah.
is something that we as countries, sovereign enterprises, need to be concerned about now. So from a cloud standpoint, I think we're regionalizing, and we don't put data in certain locations. We're very aware of where that data and availability zones go. For AI, we haven't had those conversations yet. Are there local instances of the models
Yeah.
and that you access? That could be the next dialogue we have.
I definitely see a huge risk of, right now we're having the conversation, it's out in the public of Anthropic rolling out Claude and integrating it within the Pentagon and using it to make wartime strategies, right?
Yeah.
Great use case. I mean, it's whatever. But if you think about it from an attacker perspective, nation state level perspective, how would you attack that? If you think about it now, it's going to open the doors to Anthropic and these companies for attack from nation state levels who are going to have an interest in either doing a few things. Well, the main goal of manipulating the outputs of what that model is. And how do you do that? There's a few ways. A, you can hack the infrastructure where the model's being inferenced on, or B, you can poison the data sets in which the data is being trained on,
Yeah.
right? So it's going to open up a really interesting conversation and dynamic down the road, right? What happens when we integrate these models that are controlling autonomous systems that are shooting missiles, but what happens when an adversary happens to backdoor that model, or they happen to poison the data set in which that model was trained on? So that way, when it's looking at a soldier and it thinks it's from a specific country, it's someone else, or it's acting in the way that it wasn't really intended. It's really going to open up a lot of risks. The future is really exciting for the security space and how this stuff can be leveraged. It really highlights how these things need to be protected, because the implications of this are huge. Once these are rolled out in the enterprise, and you have your humanoid at home doing your laundry. What happens when that becomes weaponized and runs amok and rogue?
Yeah.
It's a
Your
really big.
colors are washing with your whites at that point.
Yeah, right. So it really brings up, a larger question of how we can protect these models, right? From a geopolitical standpoint, or just from a defensive standpoint, right? What happens when the things that we're integrating so deeply into society can be potentially exposed or poisoned or manipulated? What happens then? So,
Yeah.
And the public facing frontier models are dealing with this at a nation state level. Private companies need to be thinking about it as they develop
yeah,
their own models, not just from a nation state attacker, but from a competitor standpoint.
yeah,
If there are companies that are developing logic around decision making, approval of
yeah,
loans or patient care or things of that sort, the distillation threat is real. Being able to reverse engineer the logic, and the poisoning threat is absolutely real to be aware of and be able to block and cut that off. So yeah, it's a new era in being able to block and defend your models in ways that we hadn't previously thought of.
no. And the implications are huge, especially wherever the outputs of these models are going. Those upstream systems that rely on them,
Yep.
the implications could be massive. So yeah, it really calls into this issue that we need to be mindful of how we're building these models, creating them, and deploying them.
Yeah. It's one thing when a database gets affected or emails get deleted, but yeah, when you're operating at this level, that's something else entirely. Uh, before we wrap up, do you guys have any other AI stories that caught your eye this week, or any other things you're tracking closely?
Anthropic wasn't the big news this week. We're not satisfied with that. I think the for me, that's the one that I was tracking the most. And I was out at the Bernstein conference, the TNT conference, and we were looking at it from a market and investor standpoint. It's fascinating to see how irrational the market is on this stuff. And I think it's, I used the analogy earlier this week. It's sort of like Michelin coming out with a new tire, and then the market saying, Toyota, watch out, you're at risk. It's almost non sequitur in
Yeah.
in the announcement versus the reaction by the market. We as security leaders need to keep the steady hand on the wheel. Defense in depth. There's lots of tooling in the stack. This is one piece of the environment. Code scanning and code development. It is an important one, and this will
Yeah.
continue to evolve and change at breakneck speed. But it did not merit the freak out that we saw in the market. But it's fascinating to watch.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's this week's initial access. Justin, Brandon, Appreciate the conversation.
Thank you.
If you found this useful, share it with someone in your organization that's responsible for architecture, AI governance, long-term risk, anything like that. And we'll see you next week.